There's a moment, you've felt it, when someone questions who you are, mocks your silence, twists your words in front of others, and you scramble. Not because you're guilty, but because you were taught to explain, and in that instant, you lose. Not your truth, your power, because the second you defend yourself, you step into a trap dressed like fairness. You accept their frame, their rules, their authority to question you, and while you're explaining, they're watching, not your words, but the weakness behind them. You try to clarify, you try to sound calm, but everything in your tone screams, please don't misunderstand me. And that's the tell, the moment they know you care too much about being seen as good. But what if? What if the most powerful response was no response at all? What if silence wasn't surrender, but control? This isn't about being emotionless, it's about becoming untouchable. And once you understand the true cost of defending yourself, you'll never reach for it again, because sometimes the strongest thing you can say is nothing. Power doesn't scream, it doesn't rush to explain itself, it doesn't throw words into the fire hoping to control how they burn. Real power waits. It watches, and when the time is right, it chooses silence, not because it's afraid, but because it doesn't need the approval of noise. Think about the people you've feared most in your life, not the ones who shouted or flailed, but the ones who simply stared, still, calm, unbothered. There's a reason for that. Because silence, when used with intention, feels dangerous. Let me show you. A few years ago, in a boardroom in Manhattan, a young executive named Sophia was being cornered by journalists. It was a live Q&A. One question came in, sharp and cruel, a loaded accusation disguised as curiosity. You've been accused of exploiting your team for personal gain. Would you like to comment on that? The room tensed. Everyone expected a counterattack, an emotional plea, a denial, but Sophia just leaned back, looked at the reporter, and said nothing. No anger, no sigh, just eye contact and time. Seconds passed, long enough for the question to collapse under its own weight. The audience didn't see a guilty leader. They saw someone unshakable, someone who didn't even recognize the question as valid. And the reporter, he blinked. He shifted. He tried to clarify, but it was too late. He had already lost the frame. Here's what happened. By not defending herself, Sophia communicated something stronger than any prepared statement could. She showed that the accusation was beneath her. Not worth breath, not worth energy. Silence in that moment didn't just protect her reputation, it elevated her status. That's the shift most people never make. They believe defense equals strength. But in power dynamics, defense equals acknowledgement, and acknowledgement grants permission. You don't fight every fire, you become the storm they're afraid to light a match in. You want to be feared, respected, impossible to rattle. Then start here, learn to be silent. Not as avoidance, but as dominance. Let them ask, let them accuse, let them fill the silence with their own projections. Because the more they speak, the more the room listens to them, and the more you don't, the more the room starts listening to you, not because of what you say, but because of what you didn't. That's not just self-control, that's power, and most will never master it, because it requires something rare. The strength to let your presence say everything, while your mouth says nothing. Power doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to whoever controls the frame. The frame is the invisible lens through which people interpret everything. And the one who defines that lens defines the story. Here's what most people don't realize. When you respond to an accusation, you've already lost control of the frame, because now you're reacting to their version of the story. You're trying to fix their perception. You're standing on their ground, playing by their rules, under their spotlight. And it doesn't matter how truthful you are, you still look guilty, not because of what you did, but because you accepted that you had to explain. Now imagine the opposite. In London, during a televised political debate, two candidates sat across from each other. One of them, Julian, had been accused hours earlier of manipulating budget numbers. The moderator asked, "Do you deny the numbers were adjusted in your favor?" The whole crowd held their breath. Julian smiled. tilted his head slightly, and asked calmly, "What do you believe?" The room froze. The moderator stammered. The audience leaned in, because something just flipped. Julian didn't just dodge the question. He threw the frame back like a mirror. Now the pressure was no longer on him to justify. It was on the accuser to prove his story mattered, to defend the frame he created. And just like that, Julian took back control. This is how power works in high-stakes situations. It's not about having the best defense. It's about never accepting the position of the defendant in the first place. When you answer to someone's judgment, you admit they have the right to judge you. But if you stay calm, ask a question, or say nothing at all, you shift the focus. You make them question their own certainty. You force them to carry the weight of their own narrative. That's when people start fidgeting, clarifying, repeating, losing rhythm. And you haven't moved, you haven't flinched. You've let their words die in the space between your silence and their insecurity. This is frame warfare, not with anger, not with force, but with elegance. You don't argue your truth, you hold it quietly, and you let them get lost in the noise of their own assumptions, because in any confrontation, there are two battles being fought, one over facts, and one over who gets to define them. And the one who controls the frame always wins the war. We live in a world obsessed with clarity. Say what you mean, post your truth, explain where you stand. But here's the paradox. The more you explain, the more ordinary you become, because clarity is comfortable. Mystery is dangerous. People fear what they don't understand, and they respect what they can't predict. That's why the most powerful presence is often the quietest one, not because it lacks something, but because it withholds everything. Let me show you. In the heart of Silicon Valley, there's a man named David Wu. He built one of the most innovative tech startups in a decade. His product went viral. Investors lined up. But here's the strange part. No one had ever seen him speak publicly. No interviews, no podcasts, no TED Talk. Not even a personal bio on his website. He let his work speak, and when people asked why he remained silent, he gave the same answer every time. I don't think my voice adds more value than my results. At first, people were skeptical. But slowly, something else happened. They started talking about him, speculating, building their own myths. Some said he was a genius, others called him cold, some feared him, all respected him, and that's the lesson. The more space you leave for interpretation, the more power you generate, because the human mind hates a vacuum. When you give them silence, they'll fill it with stories, and those stories are often far more powerful than anything you could have said. This isn't about being mysterious for the sake of ego. It's about recognizing the strength of restraint in a room full of performers. The one who watches quietly becomes the center of gravity. That's how aura is built, not through volume, but through absence. Not through performance, but through control. Every time you choose not to over-explain, you become harder to read. And the harder you are to read, the more seriously people take you, because people don't fear the loud one in the room. They fear the one they can't figure out. Power is not what you show, it's what they believe you could show, but never do. And that belief is where silence turns into legend. Sometimes, the best move is no move at all. Not because you're passive, but because you understand something most people never learn if you wait long enough. They'll destroy themselves trying to take you down. This isn't cruelty, it's patience, strategic stillness. Watch what happens when someone attacks you, and you give them nothing, no reply, no denial, no energy. At first, they feel confident. They think their words landed, they expect you to react, and when you don't, they start repeating themselves, louder, more emotional, less calculated. They begin spiraling. Let me give you an example. Last year, a popular content creator named Jenna was accused of being manipulative in her relationships. A small creator made a video calling her out, accused her of lies, emotional abuse, gaslighting. What did Jenna do? Nothing. She didn't comment. She didn't post a statement. She didn't even unfollow. She just vanished from the conversation, and that silence, it drove the accuser mad. They made more videos, posted screenshots, started tagging news outlets, but the energy shifted. People began to ask, if Jenna's not saying anything, why is this person pushing so hard? And that's where it all flipped. The accuser overplayed, they exposed their obsession, and they lost the room, not because Jenna defended herself, but because she didn't feed the fire. The truth is this: most people don't want justice. They want attention, and when you starve them of that, they lose balance. They think you're retreating, but really, you're handing them the sword and watching them fall on it. Let them post, let them rant, let them scream into the void, while you stay still, composed, absent, because absence is pressure, and the longer you stay still, the more their own behavior starts to look unstable. They become the spectacle, you become the ghost, and here's the twist: people don't rally around those who scream. They rally around the one who stays grounded while the storm burns itself out. That's the implosion strategy. You don't fight. You wait and let their thirst for reaction become the reason they collapse, not because you won, but because they couldn't stop chasing a fight you never gave them. When they push, don't push back. Pull away, not as retreat, but as redirection. Because the moment you engage with emotion, you've already confirmed their story matters. You've stepped into their storm. And storms, once entered, always leave you soaked. But what if you let the storm pass through you without ever reacting? Let me show you. Isabel, a rising influencer, had just hit 1 million followers, and right on cue, someone from her past came forward, accused her of being fake, said she wasn't who she pretended to be, posted old screenshots, subtly crafted the narrative, and the audience held its breath. Everyone waited for Isabel's response, a notes app apology, a tearful live stream, a rebuttal. Instead, she posted nothing, until 2 days later, one simple story, black screen, white text: if that's how you see it, that's it. No explanation, no anger, no defense. Just detachment, cool, neutral, undeniably composed. What happened next? People began turning on the accuser, not because they didn't believe her, but because the energy shifted. Isabel didn't validate the drama. She let it echo. She let the accusation hang in the air, untouched. And in that silence, the crowd began to question everything. Was the attack personal? Was it envy? Why did Isabel seem unaffected? And that right there is power, because when someone accuses you, they expect resistance. They want to provoke emotion. They want you to fight the narrative. But when you don't, when you stand still, when you say, that's not how I see it, you don't just reject their version of the story, you expose their motive. And now they look reactive, emotional imbalance, because the only thing more unsettling than a loud defense is calm indifference. It makes people second-guess themselves, recalculate, hesitate, and suddenly you're no longer on trial, you're elevated. The key isn't to deny, it's to dissolve. You don't meet the fire with water, you meet it with air. Let it burn itself out. And once it does, you're still there, untouched, unshaken, unapologetically still. That's not just emotional control. That's dominance without lifting a finger. There's a colder move, colder than silence, colder than absence. It's inversion. Not only do you refuse to defend, you make the accusation say more about them than it ever could about you. Because when someone throws a label at you, arrogant, selfish, manipulative, they're not always describing you. They're revealing what they fear, what they envy, what they can't control. And if you're sharp enough, you can flip that energy like a blade. Let's break it down. Someone says, you're full of yourself. You don't deny it, you lean in. And say calmly, confidence makes some people uncomfortable. They call you fake. You don't rush to prove your realness. You smile and say, people usually say that when they stop getting what they want. And now who's on the defensive? Not you. You didn't just ignore their words. You made them wear their own insecurity. This isn't cruelty. It's power judo. You're not fighting their force. You're using it. Let them come at you with emotion, you meet it with presence. Let them expect weakness, you give them stillness, and if you speak, make every word a mirror. Make them see themselves, not you, because here's the truth. Most attacks are not truth, seeking their attention, seeking their ego, seeking And when you don't give them the reaction they crave, you expose the performance. You show the crowd who's really centered and who's spinning. Let's say someone says, "You always think you're better than everyone." You don't shrink. You don't soften. You simply respond, "No, I just don't think like everyone." That's not defense. That's authority. That's the difference between asking to be understood and making them understand they don't matter. You don't reject the accusation. You redirect it, and in doing so, you become untouchable, because now they're not exposing you. They're exposing themselves to everyone watching, and nothing feels colder than that. The world tells you, defend your name, protect your reputation, clear the record. But here's the illusion no one talks about. The moment you try to prove you're innocent, you've already agreed you might be guilty. And that is the trap, because the truth doesn't need a spotlight. Only fear does, only ego. The real strategist, he doesn't argue for his image, he lets others distort it, while he rises above it. And slowly, the more they try to pull him down, the smaller they look, the more desperate, the more emotional. Let me tell you about Carter. He's a private equity partner, no social media, no press, rarely speaks in meetings, but when people talk about him, they say the same thing. I don't know what he's thinking. I can't tell if he likes me. And nothing rattles him. Oh, why? Because Carter never explains. He never clarifies. He never adjusts his image to fit anyone's comfort. And yet, people respect him more, because power doesn't come from being understood. It comes from being unreadable the minute you start defending. You look like you're managing perception. You look like you need control, which means you've already lost it. But when you don't defend, you look composed, you look clear, you look like someone who doesn't answer to noise. That's how Carter built his reputation. Not good, strong, because a good reputation demands maintenance. It demands constant clarification. But a strong reputation, it survives distortion. It commands space. That's the key. You don't need people to think well of you. You need them to think twice before coming at you. There's a reason wolves don't explain their growl. They don't have to. You want to win this game. Let others manage their image. You manage your presence. Let others perform their innocence. You perform nothing. Just stillness, just clarity, just that quiet, heavy presence that makes people wonder what you're capable of, not because you showed them, but because you didn't. There's a final shift. A moment when silence stops being a tactic and becomes your signature, because at some point, you won't need to choose silence. You'll become it. You won't calculate your responses. You'll stop responding altogether, not out of indifference, but because your presence says everything already. You become the type of person people don't attack casually, not because you retaliate, but because they know they won't win. Think about the rare few you've seen like this. They enter a room, and the noise softens. People glance. They lower their voice. Why? Because those people built something most never will. A reputation that doesn't need protection. They didn't get there by being nice, or loud, or agreeable. They got there by mastering restraint, by choosing stillness over reaction, by letting others scream while they watch. And over time, something strange happens. People stop questioning them. They stop doubting. They start assuming strength. They start defending them, even when they never asked, because silence, it invites interpretation, and human beings will always fill the gaps. If you're loud, they judge. If you're defensive, they dig. But if you're quiet and steady, they wonder. And wonder becomes myth. This is what real dominance looks like, not control over others, but over yourself. Not silence that begs to be understood, but silence that makes others listen harder. When you reach this level, people stop putting you on trial. They stop pulling you into petty debates, because they feel it. You've stepped out of their world, out of their rules, out of their reach. You're no longer reacting, you're commanding, and every move you don't make, every word you don't say, makes them speak more carefully the next time your name comes up. Not because they fear you'll explode, but because they know you won't even flinch. And in a world starving for attention, nothing is more terrifying than a person who doesn't need any. This is where it all comes together, not just a strategy, but a transformation. You stop playing defense. You stop explaining yourself. You stop chasing understanding, because understanding is for connection. Power is for distance, and when you stop needing to be understood, you start being respected, even feared. Not because of what you say, but because of what people believe you could say, but don't. You've built something bigger than an argument. You've built aura, that invisible force that follows you, that shifts the air when you enter a room. That makes people hesitate before they speak, not because you've threatened them, but because you've mastered restraint so completely. They don't know what you're holding back, and in that mystery, they imagine something bigger than anything you could have shown them directly. Let the others play for attention. Let them post their clarifications. Let them correct every rumor. You stay still, because stillness makes people cautious. Cautious people make fewer moves. Fewer moves means more control. And now, you're not just avoiding weakness. You've become the standard, the one others try to imitate, but never fully understand. They watch your silence and call it cold. They see your calm and call it arrogance. But beneath all that noise, they're watching and wondering is what gives you the edge. Because when people can't predict you, they don't challenge you, and when they don't challenge you, you never have to explain. You never have to defend. You never have to drop the mask. This is not about hiding. It's about holding presence. Holding tension, holding your ground so completely that others feel it before you even speak. The final move isn't silence. It's becoming the person who doesn't need to speak to shift the room, and once you're there, you'll never play small again. Because you'll understand this, in a world desperate to be seen, the most powerful person is the one who doesn't care if they are.